Yeah, okay. So as usual, when I'm preparing these talks, I get very ambitious. I get very caught up in what I'm doing and start diving deep into some kind of usually esoteric philosophy of some nature. And that's what happened this week, which is beautiful because it means now I have, I can cut it in half and we have another talk coming. So I really like it when there's these sequences. And last time we were talking about entering the stillness and, finding peace and God in the stillness. And you guys know that sign that's along I-70, no God, no peace, right? I think it starts with N-O. No, K-N-O. So no God, K-N-O, no peace. And then it says no, N-O, no God, no peace. And I was thinking that they should flip that around so it says no peace, K-N-O-W, no peace, no God, instead of the other way around. That's kind of what we've been saying. So I got to see that sign as I drove across the Flint Hills again this morning. Did any of you see any of the burning? Looks like there's been some major burning, even along 177. I've always wanted to see that. Pretty dramatic. So I wanted to kind of just bring us back to what we talked about last time, that whole idea of finding God in the stillness. And I loved that we had that introduction by Charles Fillmore, because I was thinking I should have an introduction by Charles Fillmore, but I don't. So it was very beautifully provided here. So instead, I have Thich Nhat Hanh, who is this amazing Buddhist monk who he actually had a stroke not long ago and is out of the coma and doing much better. I think he's 88 now. But we could all send him some light. He's in therapy. I don't think he's talking again, but he's, coming back around from that. And he says, every morning when we wake up, we have 24 brand new hours to live. What a precious gift. We have the capacity to live in a way that these 24 hours will bring peace, joy, and happiness to ourselves and others. So I love that, that opening and the idea that that brings to us. And he continues by saying, we are very good at preparing to live, but not very good at living. We know how to sacrifice 10 years for a diploma, and we are willing to work very hard to get a job, a car, a house, and so on. But we have difficulty remembering that we are alive in the present moment, the only moment there is for us to be alive. Every breath we take, every step we make can be filled with peace, joy, and serenity. We only need to be awake, alive in the present moment. Peace is every step. We shall walk hand in hand. So I just love that idea that all we have to do is just stop in this moment and recognize the beauty of life that's around us. And I love, too, that he says peace is in every step. So it's not just in sitting, it's in moving forward in our lives and living the lives that we have to live. So this week is a particularly busy week for me. I'm juggling a lot of different things. I have a performance coming up this Friday. I'm in the midst of trying to launch this Indiegogo campaign, which is actually quite involved. You have to create a video and a bunch of stuff, which I've never done before. Thankfully, I have a daughter who's very good at that kind of thing. And thanks for the internet, because she's in Utah and I'm here, and I can send her stuff and she can send it back. So that's great. But it's a new experience for me to do that, and it puts me out in the world in a way I've not done before. So it also brings up all kinds of emotional stuff in terms of, exposing myself and being vulnerable and asking the universe for what it is that I need. So a lot of different things are happening this week, and then I have this talk today, and I'm also in the throes of trying to, do what I need to do for the CD itself. It's a lot of things, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this talk at the same time that I got all this other stuff going on? And then I thought, well, actually, it's the perfect example of how we are very busy and we have all these things that we need to do and all these responsibilities, but yet we need to also make sure that we have some stillness within that space. So yesterday morning, I usually go to a yoga class that is like the height of my week. I just love it. I was like, oh, I can't afford to take the time. I need to really, be working this weekend. And then I said, no, that's not the way to go about it. I need to take the time to do that, and then the rest will happen around it. So it's this beautiful balance that we're always trying to find. So Thich Nhat Hanh also says, the miracle is not to walk on water. The miracle is to walk on the green earth in the present moment, to appreciate the peace and beauty that are available now. It is not a matter of faith. It is a matter of practice. So that made me think of my meditation practice, which is that sitting in stillness, but it's also active in a certain way because it's a practice. And how many of you here have a seated meditation practice? A few, sometimes, some ways, right? So if you're like me, and I think most of us actually find it hard to sit. And initially, actually, I found it a real pleasure. I could just go and sit, and it's like, oh, I don't have to do anything. It's like this great break. And so that went on for maybe a year, and then I got to this point where it's like I started trying very hard to do my practice right. And then I was very frustrated. I was always frustrated because I wasn't sure I had the right technique, or I was doing it the right amount of time, or should I try it this way or should I try it that way? And I kept trying different things. And then I came across these beautiful readings right at the right moment, which always happens, that said, you don't have to do anything. There's no right way to be doing it. You just need to show up on the mat and sit. And then I let go of all of that effort, and it was amazing what happened with my practice, how things started to really happen, that I was trying to make them happen before. And by just letting go of it all and letting myself be, I was able to come into a place of really a lot of beauty. And that same week, I really started to understand what they mean by meditation being a practice. I hadn't really gotten it before. I mean, I understood it, but I didn't really, hadn't experienced it, I guess, in that way. But as I was sitting there, and just bringing my mind back to my breath, I was using some candle gazing, bringing my mind back to the candle. I was like, oh yeah, this is just like training a dog. You just do it over and over again, and the dog gets better and better at doing it. But it doesn't mean then you can just stop ever training your dog. What happens? The dog starts to run wild again and disobey or just not pay attention to you, right? So you have to reinforce it by, always insisting that he follow your commands, whatever it is that they are. So it's the same. We're just sitting there, and our mind has a mind of its own, and it likes to go off and wander and chase the squirrels or whatever it's chasing that day. So our meditation practice is just us sitting there and repeatedly saying, oh, come back, come back, come back. I'm just training. I'm just in training, and I'm training my mind. So that was really beautiful to be able to see that. And now I've actually adopted also an evening practice, which is really beautiful because then you have this day of doing that's wrapped in being. So that's how to find this kind of balance. So we all have those practices that we use to keep ourselves in balance and to keep ourselves healthy, but a lot of the times when we get busy, we let those go first, whereas it's probably, better to keep those things in place. Actually, I'm sure it is. They have proven that it is. I'm trying to convince myself, to keep those things in place, because that is how we can really step into our day with awareness, with energy, with action, to really seize the day and really find that beauty that he's talking about. Otherwise, we end up living our lives frustrated, angry, stressed, and aren't really, living, so to speak. So, as I said last time, it's really in those moments of just sitting that we discover then what is ours to do. Deepak Chopra has these 3 questions that he addresses in the 7 spiritual laws of yoga that I really love. It's, who am I? What is my heart's deepest desire? And how can I serve? So he suggests that you sit with these questions and just see what comes up. So for me, sitting in meditation, that's the who am I, And there are Buddhist practices that just say, as a meditation practice, you say, who am I on the in-breath, and on the exhale, you say, don't know. Inhale, who am I? Exhale, don't know. So it's not that we're ever maybe going to come up with this, entirely brilliant knowledge of who we are at the deepest level, but some kind of understanding will come as we sit with that question. So that's the question that would have gone probably with last week's lesson. So today, we're going to step into that question a little bit more. How do we find out what that is? What is my heart's deepest desire? That's the thing that allows us, what is mine to do? What am I going to step out into the world to do? But before we can find out what that is, we need to know what our heart's deepest desire is. And sometimes that question is phrased, what do I want? I prefer this phrasing because when we think of what do I want, a lot of times it's like, oh, I want a new car, I want a mansion on the hill, I want to take a vacation for a month in Bali, which are very external things. So this is something that goes that goes deeper. So that's the thing we're going to look at this time. And next time we'll go into that, how can I serve? And how does that manifest in the world? So what I remembered when I started thinking about this topic was my favorite passage from the Bhagavad Gita. Do you guys know the Bhagavad Gita at all? So the Bhagavad Gita is an ancient Indian text. It was written sometime between 300 and 500 BCE. And it's actually part of a much longer epic called the Mahabharata, written by someone named Vyasa, they believe. And but it is it's actually the primary sacred text for many different Eastern religions. And it's a conversation between Krishna, who is an incarnation of God, and Arjuna, who is a famous prince, a very powerful prince and warrior. And it takes place on a battlefield. And what they're discussing is yoga. Not how to practice the physical practice of yoga, but the other paths of yoga, basically how to yoke oneself with the higher being, with God, whatever that is. So Arjuna is very conflicted because he has to fight. It's this the kingdom's actually gone into this huge crisis, and but on the other side, the people he has to fight, there are people that are very, very dear to him. His uncle, I believe, and someone who acted as a father figure, and so he's very conflicted about it. He doesn't want to harm them, and he doesn't want to cause any danger to them. But this is his job, and he's on pretty much the good side. It's also, of course, good versus not so good, and it's his responsibility to help return the kingdom to some kind of peace. So Krishna is his charioteer, and he's been his friend this whole time, and it's actually in this conversation in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna reveals himself as an embodiment of God. So often people wonder why it's on the battlefield when yoga is so much about peace. But this battlefield is supposed to represent the war that is within us and the struggle for self-mastery that all of us face in the world. So whenever we're caught in these kind of really deep dilemmas, what do we do? And then it's a question and answer that's answering those questions. So there's different paths of yoga that are discussed in this Bhagavad Gita. Jnana Yoga, which is the contemplative path of spiritual wisdom, or sometimes they call it the path of knowledge. Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion. Raja Yoga, which is the path of meditation and also the path that involves the physical practice. And then Karma Yoga, which is the active path of selfless service. So this passage that came to my mind says, it is better to strive in your own dharma than to succeed at the dharma of another. It's a passage that I've always loved. And in a nutshell, to me, it means whatever I feel really deeply called to do, if I am on that path, it's better than doing something that's maybe appears to me to be entirely altruistic. And in fact, Arjuna was in this mode of thinking maybe he should just retire as an ascetic to a cave and meditate in deep meditation, become a priest or something like that. He was thinking that's a higher path than going out onto the battlefield and killing, people that are really dear to me. And so he wants to escape there because that would solve his dilemma, right? But Krishna says to him, actually, that first of all, it won't work because the nature of this person is to be, very active and to be out, fighting battles and leading a kingdom. It wouldn't work for him to go into a cave. He's going to be miserable, even though he would escape temporarily from his dilemma, which is what happens with us, right? Something is facing us, something that we're called to do. It's big, it's scary. We say, oh, whoa, I'm just going to go back here to my accountant job and, do my accounting. Although that's not a bad job. Maybe you're called to be an accountant and, you shouldn't go be a politician, whatever. So it doesn't matter. But then, you do that and you're miserable because you're not really, out there following your own path. So I had the great fortune to meet and have a really beautiful study session of the Bhagavad Gita with an Indian friend of mine this week. And we've been trying to do this for many weeks. And finally, this Thursday was the first time we were able to do it and just kind of sit in meditation and do some study. And I said to her, actually, we hadn't even decided to look at the Bhagavad Gita, but I said, she's like, well, what would you like to do? And I said, well, actually, I'd love to look at this chapter in the Bhagavad Gita. And so the timing was perfect because I got a much deeper insight than I had had before. So this morning, actually, on my drive here, or this morning when I woke up, the talk is prepared, but I'm like, wait, Joseph Campbell said something really interesting about this. So we all know that phrase, follow your bliss, right, from Joseph Campbell. So, I'm like, okay, let me look that up real quick, print it out. So it says, he said, follow your bliss and doors will open to the universe where before there were only walls. Something like that. I think it's the complete passage. So it turns out, I did not know this, but here's how he came about it. This is a quote from Joseph Campbell. He was a philosopher, but his focus was comparative religions, so very, very knowledgeable in world religions. He said, now I came to this idea of bliss because in Sanskrit, which is the language of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the great spiritual language of the world, there are 3 terms that represent the brink, the jumping off place to the ocean of transcendence. Sat, Chit, Ananda, which I'm sure many of you have heard. So Sat means being. So it's what we were talking about last time, that sitting in stillness. Chit means consciousness. And in Sanskrit, there are several different names for your mind that represent different things. So Chit is the aspect of your mind that is consciousness. And Ananda, Sat Chit Ananda, Ananda means bliss or rapture. He says, I don't know whether my consciousness is proper consciousness or not. I don't know whether what I know of my being is proper being or not. But I do know where my rapture is. So let me hang on to rapture, and that will bring me both my consciousness and my being. I think it worked. This is him saying that, because obviously he did quite well in the world. So he says then, he follows to say, if you follow your bliss, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while, waiting for you, and the life that you ought to be living is the one you are living. If you are following your bliss, or wherever you are, if you are following your bliss, you are enjoying that refreshment, that life within you all the time. So unfortunately, in later years, it's gotten to be kind of very watered down, and some people think that means just a very hedonistic thing of going out for whatever self-gratification will bring you some kind of high in that moment, which is not at all what he was talking about. So in this discussion that I had with my friend, we were talking about the word dharma. So in that quote that I said to you, it's better to strive, which means there's struggle involved in striving, right? So it's better to strive at your own dharma than to succeed at the dharma of another. But what does dharma mean? Well, myself, the way I've interpreted that, for the most part, has been life's path. But in fact, the word dharma is very nuanced, and there are many meanings to dharma. So this is something I came to understand much better. There's still a lot of uncertainty, I'm sure, and will always be. I'm sure it's a word you could study for your whole life. But in this discussion with my friend, some things came up that I was not aware of that were really fascinating to me. So it actually means whenever one is completely absorbed in a certain activity. So we often call that the flow. So Michael Jordan, when he's shooting a basket, nothing else is happening. There's no him in the basket, it's just one. Or an artist who's totally absorbed in her painting, or a musician who is totally absorbed in her music, or an accountant who's totally absorbed in his numbers, whatever it is. It also means thrilled ecstasy of each moment. Infinite bliss. It means supreme bliss, unending joy, happiness, and the nature of each individual. So it's much more complicated. Sometimes life path feels like something that is coming through me, or something, pulling me from the outside, when in fact this is reflecting actually your individual nature. So this friend of mine was explaining to me that in yoga philosophy there are these kind of like patches on our brain that represent our own likes, dislikes, previous experiences, which in Indian philosophy would also be past lives. So all those things that make us unique. We all know that a baby being born, babies are very different from day one. Even identical twins have different natures and different personalities. So we're all perceiving something, what you see on the screen there or what someone says. It's the same thing, but it comes through us and then has a different experience for us because of these patches on our brain, these things that color our interpretation of the world. So those things make us each different, which means that we're all going to be differently suited to different tasks in life. So Dharma is also sometimes translated as righteousness, good conduct, or a noble quality, or a duty. And again, we tend to think of duty as something that's imposed upon us from the outside by the job that we have, some responsibility that we have. But in fact, this goes a lot deeper. And the word vocation came to mind, and I looked it up, and actually, for me, in a way, vocation is a really good, like English equivalent. And I didn't even know that this is what it meant. I mean, I had an idea in my mind. I was looking it up because I was like, am I going to use the word vocation or profession or work or you know what? Well, the definition for vocation was a strong feeling of suitability for a particular career or occupation. A person's main occupation especially regarded as particularly worthy and requiring great dedication. So that first part, a strong feeling of suitability, is so important, and sometimes we just skip over it. I think a lot of times in our culture, when we think about what do I want to do with my life, what career do I want to follow, often we're not really looking deep within. We're just thinking, oh, you know, I'd like to travel, I'm going to go be a flight attendant. Or I want to help people who aren't fairly served, and I'm going to be a defense lawyer for the government or something. So, or I want to make a lot of money, I'm going to be XYZ. Instead of really looking at ourselves, and as parents, helping our children see what those particular things might be. So they talk about, there's actually two words, these two different kinds of dharma, swadharma, which swa means the self, one's personal propensity and personality. So that's the way those vasanas that I was talking about influence us. So this is to act according to one's own taste or inborn and natural personality. And it says in the Bhagavad Gita, to act according to one's own taste, inborn and natural, is the only method of living in peace and joy, in success and satisfaction. So that's really what Joseph Campbell was getting at. When you find that way that's really your, the thing that is suited to you and your individual personality, then you're going to find this bliss and be in that bliss. So Arjun, and there's another dharma, paradharma, and para means other or another. So that's the dharma of another person. To act against the gain of one's own vasana, these patches, or this personality, this is fraught with danger, and that is very well known. So that's the commentary on that particular passage. So Arjun has been doubting his duty, what that is, and believing that perhaps it would be nobler to retire to a cave and be an ascetic. And Krishna counsels him with these words: it is dangerous to suppress one's own personality expression and to copy the activities of another, even if he be living what he judges to be a nobler or diviner life. So I just want to share a story with you that's actually very personal to me. I tried with my own daughters to find a way to help them, identify those things that seemed their natural propensity. One of my daughters was very gifted in art. The other one was a beautiful dancer, and then later in life, she really loved sewing. So she didn't know what she wanted to do in college and, what direction she wanted to go. And I said, well, hon, you really like sewing, and you're very fashionable, so how about fashion design or something like that? So she decided to do that. She came here to Manhattan to go to K-State and study fashion design. She did not have an art background, and she did not, and this fashion design is actually, it's a design degree. So it wasn't so much, I think it's apparel construction and design. So it did have to do with the actual sewing, but it was focused more on the design. It was very hard for her. She did beautiful projects, but it was very tedious. She took a lot of time, and she hated it. She hated it. And she kept saying to me, Mom, I don't see what I'm going to do with this. I don't see what I'm going to do with this. And I said, well, you can have a fashion store. You can be a fashion designer if you want, but if you don't have to do that, you could have a clothing, like a little boutique. You could take in sewing for people. You could have a fabric store. There's all kinds of things you could do. Mom, I don't see what I'm going to do with this. She just kept coming to that. And then one day she came to me and she said, Mom, I'm going to study psychology. I want to be a counselor. And I was like, oh, well, what makes you think you're going to be interested in counseling or psychology? And she said, well, all my friends come to me whenever they have a problem. They always come to me for advice. And I'm the one, they tell me, I'm the one that is able to give them some kind of advice that's actually useful and practical and helps them find their way. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't know that about my daughter. I didn't know her friends came and asked her this stuff. I knew she was level-headed, but so she switched. And it was interesting because here at K-State, she did, I don't remember the name of the degree, but it's something like Family Life and Human Services, I think it is. It's in the same school as Apparel Design and Construction, the Department of the School of Human Ecology. So I thought that was quite interesting. She didn't have to change schools, just stay right there. The minute she changed, she loved every single course she took, every single one. This spring, she graduates with an MSW from Wichita State. She is in a clinical program. She's been working now for a year and a half, loves the work, loves it. So it was a perfect example of someone finding, really taking the time and finding what was really true to them, regardless of what other people were telling them, even influential people like their mothers. So, it was a beautiful thing for me to witness and a really wonderful example for us all. So I just want to close with a passage from the Bhagavad Gita. That's really beautiful. This is my favorite translations. There are many. This is by Eknath Esvan, and it's really beautiful poetry if any of you want to read it. Even if you don't understand it, it's really one of those things you can just let sit with you. It's kind of like Rumi, that doesn't quite make sense, but it's beautiful. You have the right to work, but never to the fruit of your work. You should never engage in action for the sake of reward, nor should you long for inaction. Perform work in this world as a man established within himself, without selfish attachments, and alike in success and defeat. For yoga is perfect evenness of mind. So we're going to talk about that more next time, what that means to be in selfless service. And that's more the how. How then do I go about doing my work in the world? So Charles Fillmore says, instead of fighting life, Jesus taught man to cooperate and co-create. Jesus shows humanity how to love life, how to love the author of life with a capital A, and how to love life's activities. In this state of consciousness, man automatically drops his burdens and enters into the freedom of real living. Every morning when we wake up, we have 24 brand new hours to live. What a precious gift. Peace is every step. Thank you.